Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Wilson. I'm the Deputy Director for Regulatory Policy at the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. Very excited to present our report on energy efficiency in the Southeast. And we've been studying this for about 7 or 8 years. We've been tracking the utility performance, and we've issued blogs and some other ways we've kind of issued these data. And this is the first year we've put together a full-blown report on this, so I'm really excited about that. And it's very important to track these kinds of things and to understand sort of the trends and the impacts across the Southeast. And just kind of wanted to make sure that everybody has a chance to kind of understand what's going on. And so I want to introduce our relatively new Energy Efficiency Program Director, Forrest Bradley Wright. He's the lead author on this report and has really moved it along and made it an impressive accomplishment. And joining him will be Heather Ponin, who's an energy policy manager with SACE, who led a lot of the data analysis that underlies this report, and we're going to be hearing from her a little bit later in the presentation. So Forrest, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you all for joining us. Indeed, energy efficiency is a key resource throughout the Southeast, but understanding exactly where we are today, where we've come from, where the trends are pointing, and really what the drivers are behind that is the purpose of this report. And we're going to be walking through utility systems throughout the Southeast, really focusing primarily on the larger utilities, as well as individual states, looking at how they rank and looking at some of the unique features that is behind efficiency in each of those places. I would provide just a little bit of background, if we go to the next slide, about where exactly we're looking. We are looking throughout the states of Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, parts of Mississippi.
Forrest, I think Kyle may have skipped a slide there.
Yeah.
No?
Okay, well,
maybe one up forward then. There we go.
There you go. Excellent. So you can see on the map here the states that we're talking about, and I guess I would just basically point out that our data is directly gathered from and developed for these areas. You will notice have a very small area in North Carolina, an area in Mississippi as well that is not part of this data set. So just kind of have that as context. But to look at the scale of impact that energy efficiency is having here in the Southeast, we can look at this from the perspective of the amount of total energy saved. And in 2017, that was 2,375 gigawatt hours. Look at that in emissions reductions for carbon emissions, over 1 million tons of carbon emissions, and capacity. So the amount of load that can be met with efficiency, 11,206 megawatts that has been achieved at peak times. But to put all of that into perspective, we're talking about an impact of the equivalent of 2,600 megawatt gas-fired power plants. So if you think about the resource decisions that are made in each state or each utility, kind of what scale of impact, what value that efficiency has, it is substantial. Let's go to the next slide. We'll look at how I'm sorry, back up just one, Kyle, to the slide before this one. Thank you. We'll look at how each of the major utilities rank against each other, and then a little bit of context here. So you'll see that this is showing the percentage of energy that was saved compared to the previous year's electric sales. So we're looking at essentially on an annual basis how much of the energy needs are being met by energy efficiency. On the left, you see Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress as the clear and far and away leaders in the area. You see Georgia Power, South Carolina Electric and Gas. It goes down from there. But what I want to draw your attention to are these two indicative lines. The lower line there is the Southeast utility average. of 0.29%. And you can see that, not only do most of the utilities fall below that in the Southeast, I think that really says something about the sheer force that the Duke utilities are having on the overall regional average. But you can see that line is also far below the U.S. average at 0.69. And we'll get in a little bit further in the presentation to how other regions compare to the Southeast. But it's important to look at this and really recognize the achievement that Duke Energy has shown, but not to lose sight of the scale here. Because in some regards, you might look at quite a number of these utilities being near the average for the region. But it's important to recognize where that fits in the country. So let's go, it'll probably be the next slide. Thank you so much. So Duke Energy, as you noted, was the clear leader in our region. You can see here, particularly Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress, a quite steady increase over time. It's gone up a little bit and then down for Duke Energy Progress. But in particular, it's notable that Duke Energy Carolinas is the first utility in the region to achieve 1% of previous year's energy sales. And that's an important marker, and one that, that carries with it a lot of impact. There are a few features that we have identified as really indicating the potential for success for energy efficiency. The first of those is utility management leadership. The second is having a supportive legislative and regulatory environment. And the third is meaningful and regular stakeholder engagement. And those are important in that Duke, certainly set aside from its peers, has been active in those areas, has benefited from a conducive policy landscape, and has been supported for almost a decade now by a robust group of stakeholders working together to support the efficiency achievements. The one other thing I'll draw your attention to on this slide is Duke Energy Florida. And you'll see by comparison at the 1% and above Duke Energy Carolinas, near the 80%, the 0.8% threshold for Duke Energy Progress, that Duke Energy Florida is down around 0.2%. So far behind. There are some policy issues in Florida that certainly contribute to this. But clearly, we have a company that knows the value of energy efficiency, knows how to deliver it, and the achievement or lack thereof in Florida really stands out in contrast. Kyle, let's proceed. Southern Company is really all over the map, and in some regards, it provides a kind of a window into contrasts, and it also underscores the implications of those three features I mentioned just a minute ago. So to the left, Georgia Power is currently the leader within the Southern Company group. They're just shy of 0.5%. What probably stands out to your eye is Gulf Power in Florida in the years 2013, 2014, and just before that as well, was really racing to the top of the region for leadership around energy efficiency. It has to do with the Florida Energy Efficiency Conservation Act policy that's in place there, had been around for a long time, but in 2008, the legislature recognized that Florida was languishing, made changes, and you saw this leap ahead by Gulf Power, which quickly reversed through the political influence of the utilities on the regulatory side. They really rolled back that policy down to almost nothing. You can see that was about a 92% decline from what they had been achieving, demonstrating was certainly possible, down to what they do today. And then Mississippi Power is an interesting one. The Mississippi Commission initiated energy efficiency rulemaking a few years back. They've been in quick start phase since 2015, and we're preparing to go into comprehensive phase when Entergy Mississippi requested an indefinite delay. They have been now in hold with quick start programs. It's unclear when they will move towards comprehensive programs, but you see it stayed pretty steady these last few years. Alabama Power, on the other hand, is literally right at about zero. Really no effort, no impact, and frankly, in a state that has some of the highest energy burden, some of the highest poverty, which we'll talk about just a little bit later, and among the highest rates for electricity and average bills in the region, there clearly is a problem, and it has everything to do with the fact that there's a need for energy efficiency. Let's proceed, Kyle. South Carolina draws a very interesting contrast. South Carolina Electric and Gas. I've overlaid a chart onto this graph, and so there are a few different things here that I want to draw your eye to. The first, and this would be the years that I've covered just a little bit, but back in 2013, about 0.5% for the region, and at that time, that's a pretty decent level, and had been there for a little while. This also was, in the period of time when the VC Summer nuclear plant was really being pushed forward. Ultimately, that project failed rather catastrophically financially, and has been canceled. But during that time, the funding, and this is the yellow line that you see there on the upper side, the funding for efficiency programs began to be drawn down. Programs were eliminated, and what this slide is showing is a fork in the road, a decision that they took to pursue the nuclear plant rather than and really pushing down investment in energy efficiency. And here then on the lower left, you have a chart that shows the starting position in 2012 for South Carolina Electric and Gas and Entergy Arkansas. You see at that time, South Carolina Electric and Gas was higher. It was about 0.5%. Entergy Arkansas down 0.25. And by 2017, the direction is certainly reversed. South Carolina Electric and Gas dropped down to 0.25%, while Entergy Arkansas had increased up to about 1.5%, which is just, again, to kind of clarify for our map, that's just a little bit out of the geography for most of the data that I'm showing you today. But nevertheless, it was an interesting contrast because these are utilities, at least within range of each other's size. Entergy Arkansas is a little bit smaller. And I guess I want to just finish by drawing your eye towards the bottom here. You see there's, of course, a big difference in the amount of funding that goes. But the question and the issue that utilities customarily raise in seeking to diminish the amount of energy efficiency that is done is just the cost. There's a cost associated with this resource. If you put that cost onto customer bills, it becomes a burden, and their claim is that that's a reason not to do efficiency. But energy efficiency has been proven across the country as the least cost energy resource. It has to go through rigorous cost-benefit analysis in order to be selected and invested in. And often it's not even given the chance. So what you see is over the course of time, those investments in Arkansas have not only continued to meet the energy need, reduced energy waste there, but it has occurred while rates have stayed low, among the lowest in the country, and the average bill you'll see is more than 25% lower. It's a huge difference between these two utilities. And South Carolina Electric and Gas, the VC Summer project is canceled. They, as we understand it, are exploring. They are studying how they might increase energy efficiency going forward. We certainly think that's the right direction, and that this lesson from the previous decisions and the direction they took previously is one that we hope will be remembered in that leadership at both the utility and amongst government officials related to this will recognize and move in this direction. Let's go to the next. So Florida Power and Light really sort of bookends the other side of this conversation, where Duke is breaking the 1% barrier. Florida Power and Light has never performed with much impact on energy efficiency. And I mentioned with regard to Gulf Power that the legislation intended to expand and accelerate energy efficiency in Florida back passed in 2008. It began to have an effect, and all of the utilities, including Florida Power and Light, were given higher targets that they were expected to reach. There was then a change in political leadership at the governor, and while Tampa Electric and Gulf Power proceeded with the targets they had been given and directed to meet, with rolling out programs to do so, Florida Power and Light held back, and they didn't get their programs authorized until they had gotten some technical changes. Use of the RIM test, which means that any impact on rates would disqualify. Use of a 2-year screen. So anything that pays back in 2 years or less, i.e. the most cost-effective, the fastest return investments for energy efficiency, were disqualified from the program. And they also, since that time, have used the analysis of how much efficiency is available to greatly underestimate the potential. We know it's underestimated because the proof is all across the country. The efficiency is being delivered with great impact. So last year, as John mentioned, we've been doing this analysis for a number of years. Last year, Florida Power and Light was given our designation as the worst utility because not only are they achieving next to nothing in efficiency impact for their customers, but they actually had an outsized influence in that political campaign to undermine the FECA, the Florida Energy Efficiency Conservation Act policy, and in that way had dragged down their other utility peers as well. So, ignominy for them in this year as well. Let's proceed. So I'd like to hand over to Heather Ponen to talk about the relationship between customers and what they pay on their bills and energy efficiency. Heather?
Hi, this is Heather Ponen. Thanks for the introduction. Just to quickly kind of tell you why I'm here. I handle the bulk of the data collection and analytics for this report. And as Forrest mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about affordability. And so, like Forrest mentioned earlier, one of the main benefits of energy efficiency is that it helps lower utility bills and makes them more affordable for customers. And to tee up the next section on state pages, I thought it would be helpful to provide some context for why lower bills are necessary for the residents in a lot of these states. And the analysis you've seen thus far has focused on the utilities, but I'd really like to highlight some of the information about how to measure affordability for customers. And so one way of doing this is by looking at the percent of household income that's spent just on energy costs. This is also known as an energy burden. And generally, if a customer spends more than 6% of their income on energy costs, then those costs are defined as unaffordable. And so the map to the left shows the energy burdens according to county for the Southeast. And basically what we learned from this map is that there are really a lot of areas in the region where costs are above that affordability threshold. Okay, and so this map shows for all counties, all residents, all income levels. And while we're looking at that, it's still important to note that there is a link between that affordability has to low-income customers, just because even average bills or moderate variations in monthly costs, those carry the possibility of raising energy costs to an unaffordable level, so above that 6% threshold when income is low. So really efficiency programs that are targeted at these people are helping them, push back below that 6% barrier. But this is really a problem, particularly in the Southeast, because in the region, it's more likely that a customer is going to experience poverty than the average American. So to provide some context on that, the poverty rates are high enough where in Florida, it's 16% of households are in poverty, and Mississippi is nearly 22%, and that's double the national average. But there has been some good focus on low-income programs. I'll take an opportunity here to highlight Duke's Neighborhood Energy Saver program, which is a neighborhood delivery-based program. It's been the most successful in the region to date. And I think it was actually one of the early adopters in the region as far as low-income or income-qualified efficiency programs go. So now that I've kind of teed that up, I'm going to hand it back to Forrest, who I think is going to kind of talk at some of the state level specific needs.
Thank you, Heather. Kyle, we can go to the next slide. So I want to tell you, we are giving you a snapshot, a taste of what is in the report. On the utility system side, we have several other utilities. We've gone into additional depth that I've not included today. And for the states, of course, we do have each state. I'm only going to touch on 2 today. So I want to make sure that you all are aware the report is now released. There is a blog related to it as well. You'll find a great deal of additional detail, as well as some additional states and utilities in there. So just again, a few moments on a couple of states. Tennessee is important. TVA, of course, is an enormous utility provider in the region. And in Tennessee, there is no independent regulator. You have the Tennessee Valley Authority serving as the utility provider and the regulator of themselves, in essence, self-regulated. And that lack of checks and balances really has played out when it comes to efficiency. You had at one time, not to paint it all in one color, but you had at one time TVA identifying energy efficiency as a preferred resource and being on the front edge of treating it on the same footing as supply resources when doing their integrated resource planning. So when looking at their energy needs over the coming decades, their existing resources, what resources they would need to meet those, they identified energy efficiency as the least cost resource in their most recent integrated resource plan in 2015. But they went ahead and overbuilt on gas generation anyways. So the unfortunate reality, the concept was good. The unfortunate reality is that leadership at TVA has simply steered in another direction. And that means that they have been making substantial investments in these new generation resources, to the point that they now say they don't need capacity, they don't need energy efficiency, and they've been systematically defunding it as a result. I'll come back to that in just a moment, but in addition to winding down funds that have been in place delivering their core programs over time, they have been also imposing or passing along to the local power companies grid access charges that have become fixed fees. Those fixed fees have the effect, as you have a larger percentage of your bill going towards a mandatory payment that you cannot reduce depending on your usage, it undercuts the incentive to conserve energy. And in effect, it can wipe out the impacts of efficiency investment. So we estimate that with the increase in fixed charges just in Knoxville, they have, for the equivalent of 10 years, knocked out the energy efficiency savings that would have been there. There's one other feature of how things are playing out presently with TVA, and certainly this is impacting the state of Tennessee substantially. And I mentioned the funding for core programs has been being wound down, but there's been a lot of visibility for TVA financial contributions to energy efficiency in the form of ceremonial checks, PR events, generally $1 million energy efficiency pilot programs. So sort of once-off projects. They get a lot of visibility, but simply don't have the impact at a resource level that the programs have historically. So it's important not just to to spend money and to talk about doing energy efficiency, but it's important that it really be fundamentally driving resource decisions. I mean, it's just common sense that you would seek to reduce resource waste as a way to bring down costs. But there's been a different direction. Outgoing CEO Bill Johnson has certainly been a factor in that. Remains to be seen what direction TVA will go in the future. But even as they say they are over capacity in their existing generation portfolio, there are a number of coal power plants that will be retiring over coming years. And efficiency's value is greatest when you are making the investments in preparation for something like a major unit retirement, rather than retiring the unit. And what has often happened, as I've experienced in certain state contexts, is that the utility will at that time say it's too late for energy efficiency. Let's go and build another gas power plant, and you end up spending more again than you needed to. Let's go on to the next slide. So North Carolina, certainly it's a success story. They are the leader in the region, and it goes back to those indicators that we talked about before. But they do have a very conducive regulatory environment. Their renewable energy portfolio standard accommodates energy efficiency at a fairly substantial level. They have the ability for the utility to not only recover costs, direct costs associated with energy efficiency programs, but also to earn a performance incentive. So the more that customers save, the utility can earn off of that. And that is a driver for utility business decisions, and that ends up playing to get into that utility management leadership. And I mentioned as well the stakeholder commitment that many organizations, including SACE, have been a part of for many years, and those efforts are ongoing. That also is delivering value. But there is, as you look to the right here on this chart, you'll see the state average, the Southeast regional average. You see that again, North Carolina is in a strong position, really compared to their peer states at 0.75. Clearly, that's being carried by Duke Energy. But you also see a real disconnect. So as conducive as the regulatory and the legislative climate are in many regards in North Carolina, as committed as stakeholders are, and not just to work related to Duke Energy. There are many organizations that work towards expanding the impact of efficiency in non-Duke utilities, but the performance of those utilities is far lower. So you also do have tendencies. There are exceptions, and they're notable, but you do have tendencies across the region for lower performance by cooperative utilities and municipal utilities. Again, there are a number of notable exceptions. I mentioned in Florida the disappointing results for many of the utilities there, but Orlando Utility Commission is an impressive leader there at about 0.6%. So you do have exceptions to this. In North Carolina, you have Roanoke Electric Cooperative that is not listed on this particular chart, but they have innovative programming. They have on-bill financing, the pay-as-you-save program available to all customer classes. So there are some bright spots, and certainly we keep our eye out not just at the big utilities, but also at some of the smaller utilities that may be more ready, more willing to pursue innovative strategies. Kyle, let's go on to the next slide. So in conclusion, how does the Southeast compare? I gave you a sense of that at the beginning. I have only two regions outside of the Southeast identified here. Obviously, there are many others that would further portray where we are. But those are the two leaders, New England and the Pacific regions, at 1.5% for the entire region, and 1.2% for the entire region. So, essentially double the national average in those regions. But look at where they are compared to where the Southeast is. Literally 75 to 80% higher. They're doing 4 to 5 times as much energy savings as the Southeast regional average. As far as utilities, where do the utilities fall? Where do the states fall? You'll remember that after Duke, there wasn't even another utility in the region that hit 0.5%, at least of the major utilities at this time. So besides Duke, all of the major utilities are below the national average, and many of the utilities are far below even the Southeast average, particularly, of course, looking at Florida and Alabama there. So just to conclude, those 3 indicators, the keys to success that we have seen really important to watch are utility management leadership, support of regulatory and legislative policy, and consistent and robust stakeholder engagement. And just to really put this into frame of decision making, energy efficiency is proven as the least cost energy resource. It brings benefits of reduced risk, because unlike a nuclear power plant project that if it fails ends up having a catastrophic financial impact, or the Kemper coal gasification plant in Mississippi that Mississippi Power was building and has had massive financial impact to the point that they're selling off Gulf Power in Florida. Those decisions can have huge impacts, not just on the companies, on customers. While energy efficiency is much more modular, you can add it as you need it. You don't take on the kind of risk. It also is an important part of reliability. We are at a very dynamic time in the utility industry and in electric technology. Renewable energy brings many benefits that complement energy efficiency quite well. So the way that energy efficiency is optimized is when it is identified as a go-to resource. When utilities and regulators are involved in integrated resource planning, decision-making of where our energy needs will be met over the next 10 and 20 years, energy efficiency needs to be a key part of that. It needs to be competing against the supply resources, not added in on the side and not an afterthought. And when utilities want to build power plants, it's time that we had energy efficiency compete directly. And in that way, make sure that we really are getting the least cost resources, the resources that will best serve our need. And ultimately, I think that we can all appreciate that high energy costs are a drag on society. High energy costs bring down economic productivity. High energy costs affect, as you heard from Heather earlier, people across a wide swath of our population, including low income, but not only low income. And of course, it is a responsibility of regulators. It is responsibility of the utilities to be keeping our costs low. That means the bills that we pay. And we in the Southeast often hear conversation about rates and an attempt to distract from what we're really paying, the bills that we pay, the all included costs that we pay in this region, which are very high in comparison to other regions and to the national average. So strategies to lower bills for customers should lead with investments in energy efficiency. So we will have time for questions and discussion. I think we're at that point now. Kyle, you can go to the next slide here, but really appreciate all of you taking interest in this subject, and do hope that you will avail yourself of the report and really dig in. There's a lot of great information in there.
Thank you very much, Forrest. Very much appreciated, and Heather as well. I did get one question via the chat, and there's a Q&A button on the bottom. If you'd like to click that, that would be great. I'm not sure if we're able to open up the line for verbal questions, but if there is someone who would prefer to ask verbally, just indicate that in the chat, and we'll see if we can make that possible. The one question we've already gotten relates specifically to KUB and asked about its efficiency rebates being discontinued at the end of this month. And we are not aware of the any specific rebates that are being discontinued at the end of the month. Most of TVA's energy efficiency rebates, and many of which were available through Knoxville Utility Board, have been discontinued. They do still offer the eScore program, which does have some rebates available depending on the services that you obtain through the eScore program. But it is there are some fees also for participating in that program. So, and then other than that, we'd need a little bit more clarification as to which rebates, energy efficiency rebates, that is, you might be referring to. Next, Jenny Russell has a question, and Forrest, I'll toss this to you, but she asks if there's other methods for tracking energy efficiency, for example, in relation to greenhouse gas reductions rather than related to retail sales.
Yeah, it's a great question, and certainly there are. Ultimately, energy efficiency is offsetting the use of other generating resources. So, you can, at a sort of rough level, you can simply identify the number of megawatt hours or kilowatt hours that you have avoided through energy efficiency, and there are calculators that you can use that would correlate that to greenhouse gas reductions, and the EPA has a calculator of that type that's easy to find. It additionally connects that to things you can relate to in terms of the equivalent, the emissions reduction equivalent of removing a certain number of cars off of the road per year. So at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that was the case for the region, that you could look at that as as equivalent of removing I'm not seeing my figure right in front of me right now, but again, removing cars from the road. So that's the general answer. However, there is a relationship, of course, with the sources of energy that are being used. So I think it's generally the case that energy efficiency removes the most polluting resource first. Often that's sort of a conventional wisdom anyways, because less efficient generating units are the ones that fire up last. You wouldn't run those until you have to. So if you reduce your energy waste, you're avoiding the need to use the dirtiest generating units. But it depends on your particular utility, what their resource mix is. I guess you could imagine that at a certain point, you would have such a preponderance of renewable energy that you wouldn't be offsetting so much carbon. You'd be doing efficiency for other reasons. But in our region at this time, of course, you really do have a very large impact on greenhouse gas reduction by reducing energy waste.
Great, thank you, Forrest. The next question is from Renee Sexton, and she asks about how the discontinuation of the VC Summer Nuclear Station has affected both SCE&G and C&T Cooper in respect to energy efficiency.
Well, the first is that for a number of years now, the skyrocketing costs of the VC nuclear plant, really came at the expense of spending that money for better things like energy efficiency. And so, as you saw in the graph earlier, there was a decline in annual funding for energy efficiency. There have been, a series of one rate hike after another there that are the kind of thing that make regulators and legislators and utilities skittish about spending money, certainly for something like energy efficiency that maybe they don't want to spend it on in the first place. But there is, a different political landscape now. Obviously, everybody knows the final outcome of that project. It's a failed project. That means all of the costs are really for nothing. There's certainly been a financial consequence to the company now in merger talks and being acquired because of the financial harm they did to the company there. And there's a change in I think public expectations around their officials, government officials, to have some independence from the utility and not not just go along, really show that they're for customers. So you have, as I mentioned, SEE&G currently undertaking an energy efficiency potential study. It was the kind of thing that about 10 years ago they did and started out. They really started out aiming for about 0.8% and were on their way towards that at the time when they changed direction. So the proof will be in the pudding, but the change in direction it seems to be ripe.
Great, thank you, Forrest. I don't think we have any other questions just yet, so I'm standing by. Let's see. Is this? Yeah. Bruce Ritchie asks if there's anything on the horizon in Florida that we're watching for. We're always watching on the horizon in Florida for things, but not necessarily good things all the time. Forrest, do you want to talk a little bit about the upcoming FECA proceedings that are in Florida and explain what FECA is to a lot of folks who may not be from Florida?
So FECA is the Florida Energy Efficiency Conservation Act. It's been around for quite a long time. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, in 2008, the legislature took steps to really take it to the next level. And the way that this policy works is that the utilities, all of the major investor-owned utilities, as well as Jacksonville and Orlando, are required to go through a process of evaluating the energy efficiency potential and using that to establish targets, 10-year targets, and these proceedings happen every 5 years. So really it's the subsequent 5 years that become the most important. And this is a litigated proceeding. It's going to be very technical. The utilities have certainly given every indication it is their aim and intention to really suppress energy efficiency as they have been doing going forward. And so there will be parties that intervene. The Southern Alliance for Clean Energy being one of those, to really dig into those numbers and to make the case for a better set of targets there. But it's a kind of issue that does not customarily garner the kind of visibility and the political momentum that solar has in Florida, and yet it has every bit as much value as an energy resource. So look for, as this proceeding gets underway early in 2019. Look for developments related to this because it clearly it's not going to get better on its own. It clearly is going to take interest from the public, hard work from those in these proceedings, and hopefully some changes in attitudes at the utility and the commission if we're going to see a real change there.
Great, thank you, Forrest. We don't have any other questions. We'll probably just wrap it up here in the next moment or two. So I want to first thank everyone for taking the time to participate, and I also want to briefly just thank also a lot of our allies who work with us on energy efficiency across the region, some of whom are on the call. I won't call out names, but a lot of the insights and access to the data and all of that sort of thing depend on a much wider network of people and organizations across the Southeast. And so we certainly are appreciative of those relationships and want to recognize that it takes a lot of people to move the utilities in the Southeast, and we're hoping that perhaps this year we'll see an uptick in energy efficiency as we have seen over the past few years with solar power in the Southeast, and begin to really move the region towards a cleaner energy future. Given that no one has chipped in with an additional question during this time, I think we're going to wrap up the webinar, and thank you again for participating. Goodbye, everyone.